Chapters 19 through 21 of Space Viking by H. Beam Piper. Read by Mark Nelson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Space Viking 19. Prince Trask of Tanith and Prince Simon Bentrick were dining together on an upper terrace of what had originally been the mansion house of a Federation-period plantation. It had been a number of other things since. Now it was the municipal building of a town that had grown around it, which had somehow escaped undamaged from the Dunnan Blitz. Normally about 5,000 or 10,000, the place was now jammed with almost 50,000 homeless refugees from half a dozen other towns that had been destroyed, overflowing the buildings and crowding into a sprawling camp of hastily built huts and shelters, and already permanent buildings were going up to accommodate them. Everybody, locals, Mardukkans, and Space Vikings, had been busy with the work of relief and reconstruction. This was the first meal the two commanders had been able to share in any leisure at all. Prince Bentrick's enjoyment of it was somewhat impaired by the fact that from where he sat he could see in the distance the sphere of his disabled ship. "I doubt we can get her off-planet again, let alone into hyperspace." "Well, we'll get you and your crew to Marduk in the Nemesis, then." They were both speaking loudly, above the clank and clatter of machinery below. "I don't know how either of us will be received. Space Vikings haven't been exactly popular on Marduk lately. They may thank you for bringing me back to stand trial," Bentrick said bitterly. "Why, I'd have anybody shot who let his ship get caught as I did mine. Those two were down in atmosphere before I knew they'd come out of hyperspace." "I think they were down on the planet before your ship arrived." "Oh, that's ridiculous, Prince Trask," the Mardukkan cried. "You can't hide a ship on a planet, not from the kind of instruments we have in the Royal Navy." "We have pretty fair detection ourselves," Trask reminded him. "There's one place where you can do it, at the bottom of an ocean, with 1,000 or so feet of water over her. That's where I was going to hide the Nemesis, if I got here ahead of Dunnan." Prince Bentrick's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly to his plate. That was a theory he'd like to accept if he could. "But the locals, they didn't know about it." "They wouldn't. They have no off-planet detection of their own. Come in directly over the ocean, out of the sun, and nobody'd see the ship." "Is that a regular Space Viking trick?" "No, I invented it myself on the way from Seashat. But if Dunnan wanted to ambush your ship, he'd have thought of it too. It's the only practical way to do it." Dunnan, or Neville Orme. He wished he knew, and was afraid he would go on wishing all his life. Bentrick started to pick up his fork again, changed his mind, and sipped from his wineglass instead. "You may find you're quite welcome on Marduk at that," he said. "These raids have only been a serious problem in the last 4 years. I believe, as you do, that this enemy of yours is responsible for all of them. We have half the Royal Navy out now, patrolling our trade planets. Even if he wasn't aboard the Enterprise when you blew her up, you've put a name on him and can tell us a good deal about him." He set down the wineglass. "Why, if it weren't so utterly ridiculous, one might even think he was making war on Marduk." From Trask's viewpoint, it wasn't ridiculous at all. He merely mentioned that Andre Dunnan was psychotic and let it go at that. The Victrix was not completely unrepairable, although quite beyond the resources at hand. A fully equipped engineer ship from Marduk could patch her hull and replace her Dillinghams and her Abbott lift and drive engines and make her temporarily spaceworthy until she could be gotten to a shipyard. They concentrated on repairing the Nemesis, and in another 2 weeks she was ready for the voyage. The 600-hour trip to Marduk passed pleasantly enough. The Mardukan officers were good company, and found their Space Viking opposite numbers equally so. The two crews had become used to working together on Autholma, and mingled amicably off watch, interesting themselves in each other's hobbies and listening avidly to tales of each other's home planets. The Space Vikings were surprised and disappointed at the somewhat lower intellectual level of the Mardukans. They couldn't understand that. Marduk was supposed to be a civilized planet, wasn't it? The Mardukans were just as surprised and inclined to be resentful that the Space Vikings all acted and talked like officers. Hearing of it, Prince Bentrick was also puzzled. Forecastle hands on a Mardukan ship belong definitely to the lower orders. "There's still too much free land and free opportunity on the Sword Worlds," Trask explained. "Nobody does much bowing and scraping to the class above him. He's too busy trying to shove himself up into it. And the men who ship out as Space Vikings are the least class-conscious of the lot. Think my men will have trouble on Marduk about that? They'll all insist on doing their drinking in the swankiest places in town." "No, I don't think so. Everybody will be so amazed that Space Vikings aren't 12 feet tall, with 3 horns like a Zarathustra damn-thing, and a spiked tail like a Fafnir manticore, that they won't even notice anything less. Might do some good in the long run. Crown Prince Edvard will like your Space Vikings. He's much opposed to class distinctions and caste prejudices. Says they have to be eliminated before we can make democracy really work." The Mardukans talked a lot about democracy. They thought well of it. Their government was a representative democracy. It was also a hereditary monarchy, if that made any kind of sense. Trask's efforts to explain the political and social structure of the Sword Worlds met the same incomprehension from Bentrick. "Why, it sounds like feudalism to me." "That's right, that's what it is. A king owes his position to the support of his great nobles. They owe theirs to their barons and landholding knights. They owe theirs to their people. There are limits beyond which none of them can go. After that, their vassals turn on them." "Well, suppose the people of some barony rebel. Won't the king send troops to support the baron?" "What troops?" "Outside a personal guard and enough men to police the royal city and hold the crown lands, the king has no troops. If he wants troops, he has to get them from his great nobles. They have to get them from their vassal barons, who raise them by calling out their people." That was another source of dissatisfaction with King Angus of Graham. He had been augmenting his forces by hiring off-planet mercenaries. "And the people won't help some other baron oppress his people. It might be their turn next." "You mean the people are armed?" Prince Bentrick was incredulous. "Great Satan, aren't yours?" Prince Trask was equally surprised. "Then your democracy's a farce, and the people are only free on sufferance. If their ballots aren't secured by arms, they're worthless. Who has the arms on your planet?" "Why, the government." "You mean the king?" Prince Bentrick was shocked. "Certainly not. Horrid idea. That would be—why, it would be despotism. Besides, the king wasn't the government at all. The government ruled in the king's name. There was the Assembly, the Chamber of Representatives, and the Chamber of Delegates. The people elected the representatives, and the representatives elected the delegates, and the delegates elected the chancellor. Then there was the prime minister. He was appointed by the king, but the king had to appoint him from the party holding the most seats in the Chamber of Representatives. And he appointed the ministers, who handled the executive work of the government. Only their subordinates in the different ministries were career officials, who were selected by competitive examination from the bottom jobs and promoted up the bureaucratic ladder from